the grammar stage, kindergarten, or children garden through 4th grade. So far, except of course for Latin, the curriculum contains nothing that departs very far from common practice. The difference will be felt rather in the attitude of the teachers, who must look upon all these activities less as subjects in themselves than as a gathering together of material for use in the next part of the trivium. That is a quote from Dorothy Sayers from The Lost Tools of Learning. Houses rest on foundations. Journalists gather all the facts before writing their stories. Scientists accumulate data before forming theories. Violinists and dancers and defensive tackles rely on muscle memory, stored in their bodies by hours of drill and practice. A classical education requires a student to collect, memorize, and categorize information. Although this process continues throughout all 12 grades, the first 4 grades are the most intensive for fact collecting. This is not a fashionable approach to early education. Much classroom and time, as well as energy, has been spent in an effort to give children every possible opportunity to express what is inside them. There is nothing wrong with self-expression, but when self-expression pushes the accumulation of knowledge off stage, something is out of balance. Young children are described as sponges, literally because they soak up knowledge, but there is another side to the metaphor. Squeeze a dry sponge and nothing comes out. First, the sponge has to be filled. Language teacher Ruth Beechick writes, quote, "Our society is so obsessed with creativity that people want children to be creative before they have any knowledge or skill to be creative with," end quote. Your job during the elementary years is to supply the knowledge and skills that will allow the child to overflow with creativity as his or her mind matures. That does not mean that your first grader has to learn about complex subjects in depth, or that you are going to force him or her to memorize long lists of details. In the first 4 years of learning, you will be filling your child's mind and imagination with as many pictures, stories, and facts as you can. Your goal is to supply mental pegs on which later information can be hung. Think of an experience most adults have had. You read about a minor movie star and suddenly you see his or her name everywhere. You will learn a new vocabulary word and instantly notice it sprinkled throughout all sorts of different texts. You happen across the name of a tiny, obscure foreign country, and in the next few days notice a dozen news items about it. You might remark to your spouse, "What a coincidence!" Usually, though, that information has surrounded you all along. The movie star's name, the new word, the foreign country were already in the magazines and newspapers at the checkout line, but because the information was unfamiliar to you, your eyes passed over it without recognition. Once the information entered your memory, you recognized that and began to accumulate more and more details. This is what you'll be doing with your elementary school child. You might read a book about the planet Mars to your second grader. If it is the first time that he or she has heard about the planet Mars, he or she probably will not grasp all the information that you are giving them. But they may hear on the news that night the most recent information from the Mars space probe, and suddenly something that would have passed by them clicks in their mind. You will tell them in history about the Roman god Mars, the father of Romulus and Remus, and he will hang this detail on the peg that you have provided when you read that book about the planets. When he or she runs across the word martial and asks what it means, you can tell him or her that it means warlike and comes from the name Mars, god of war, and the information will stick. The whole structure of the trivium recognizes that there is an ideal time and place for each part of learning: memorization, argumentation, and self-expression. The elementary years are ideal for soaking up knowledge. A classical education assumes that knowledge of the world, past and present, takes priority over self-expression. Intensive study of facts equips the student for fluent and articulate self-expression later on. Too close a focus on self-expression at an early age can actually cripple a child later. A student who has always been encouraged to look inside themselves may not develop a frame of reference, a sense of how his or her ideas measure up against the thoughts and beliefs of others. So the key to the first stage of the trivium is content, and more content. In history, science, literature, and to a lesser extent, art and music, the child should be accumulating masses of information, stories of people and wars, names of rivers, cities, mountains, and oceans, scientific names, properties of matter, classifications, plots, characters, and descriptions. The young writer should be memorizing the nuts and bolts of language, parts of speech, parts of a sentence, vocabulary roots, etc. The young mathematician should be preparing for higher math by mastering the basic math facts. And so why are the first 4 grades a particularly fruitful time to concentrate on content? This is the first time your child will encounter Egyptian embalming rites or the atmosphere of Venus. This is the first time that they will understand what light is made of or why Americans rebelled against the British. He or she will never get a second chance to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe or hear The Hobbit read aloud for the first time. Seize this early excitement. Let the child delve deep. Let them read and read more. Do not force them to stop and reflect on it yet. Do not make them decide what they like or don't like about ancient Rome. Let them wallow in gladiators and chariot races. He or she wants to find out how things work, how ancient people lived, with where Mount Vesuvius is located, and what Pompeii looked like covered with volcanic ash. This thirst for sheer accumulation will not ever die completely, but it is more easily satisfied later on. And the wonder of that first encounter with a strange civilization will never come again. The immature mind is more suited to absorption than argument. The critical and logical faculty simply does not develop until later on. The typical second grader will take great joy in singing the latest television commercial to you word for word, but will stare at you slack-jawed if you ask him why the advertiser wants him to buy the product, or what the merits of the products are, or whether it is reasonably priced. There is nothing wrong with the child accumulating information that they don't know yet, and that they don't yet understand. It all goes into the storehouse for later use. Susan recalls that somewhere around the 2nd grade, she learned to chant the entire list of helping verbs. The uses of a helping verb weren't clear to her until much later on, but she found that list popping into her mind whenever she is checking her own writing for grammatical errors or learning a foreign language. And finally, there is the enjoyment factor. Children like lists at this age. They like rattling off rote information, even if they don't understand. They enjoy the accomplishment, the look on the face of an adult when they trot out their stored knowledge, and the sounds of the syllables rolling off of their tongues. As adults, we may tend to protect our children from memory work because we find it difficult and tedious. But most young children enjoy repetition and delight in the familiarity of memorized words. How many times have you read a book to a 4-year-old who already knows the entire book by heart? And so as your child's teacher, you will serve as a source of information. In the early grades, you will be telling your child stories, reading to them from history and science, teaching them math facts, and you will expect them to be able to repeat back to you the stories and facts that they have heard. This process, which we will outline in detail for each area of the curriculum, will train them to grasp facts and express them in their own words. Do not make kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade students dig for information. Fill their mind and imagination with images and concepts, pictures and stories. Spread knowledge out in front of them and let them feast. Schools struggle to make time for all the subjects that students need and want, such as grammar, writing, reading, math, history, science, art, music, religion, typing, sex education, etc. Part of the school dilemma results from the school's assertion of a parental role. Since you are filling that position in a child's life, you won't have to decide between sex education and mathematics. But homeschoolers also struggle with the massive material that could be covered. There are so many good history books, science experiments, works of classical literature, piano pieces, violin concerti, and art techniques. So, how do you pick and choose? In the elementary grades, we suggest that you prioritize reading, writing, grammar, and mathematics. History and science are important, but if you do not cover all of biology in first grade, it does not matter. The child's going to get biology at least twice more before they go to college. And so if you skimp on reading or writing, though, you're likely to hamper the child's educational process. So history and science are reading dependent, and so you need to work on reading and math and then on history and science. A child who reads and writes well will pick up surprising amounts of history and science as they browse. A child who has difficulty reading and writing will struggle with every subject. In first grade especially, the child's mind is busy with new skills. You spend an immense amount of time in one-on-one tutoring. Language skills and mathematics will take up most of that time. If you do history and science 2 or 3 times a week, that is okay. If you don't start music until 2nd or 3rd grade, the sky won't fall. If you do not do art until 4th or 5th grade, nothing extremely drastic will happen. Don't feel that you must teach every subject in depth. Remember, classical education teaches a child how to learn. The child who knows how to learn will grow into a well-rounded and well-equipped adult, even if they did not finish their first grade science book.